die. Came onto my heart to actually talk about today. And without giving, we're all, with all the things that are going on in the world at present, there just seems to be a lot of suffering. The atrocities that are happening in the Ukraine, the amount of people that are being moved and then having to become refugees, losing everything. And just basically all around the world, there are different peoples who are being dislodged, or even in just around the corner, you might find someone because of COVID, because of the lack of being able to get an income, you lose your home. And that just is so devastating. Everything, your whole world collapses. And I was thinking, where in scripture talks about this? And of course, it's the book of Job. It's a little book that maybe some people overlook. It's tucked away, but it's got a lot in it. I'll only be touching on Job. I'm not even going to be able to attempt the whole book, but I give an overview of the book itself. Is about suffering and about how Job responds to that suffering. What we need to do, first of all, is to get an idea is what is suffering? Where did it come from? Suffering, it can be many things. It can be personal, it can be physical, it can be mental, it can be the fact of being bereft of friends, family. It can be bereft of somewhere to put your head. Many things. But what is the root of suffering? Many people blame God. Oh, if there was a God, then he wouldn't allow suffering. If he's a loving God, why is he allowing suffering? Why is he allowing all these atrocities to happen? We have to get it into the right perspective. We have to put on the right glasses to see, so to speak. Because it all starts back in Genesis. I sound like a bit of a record because most of my sermons actually go back to Genesis, but they do. And it's in chapter 3, 16 to 17. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in that day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Well, that's a warning. If it wasn't one, if I ever heard a warning, that is very clear. This is when man is given the warning after once he was created and he clearly was told what would happen if he disobeyed. Well, we read on in chapter 3, verse 2 to 6. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruits of the trees in the garden. Because the serpent had come in and beguiled her and was asking silly questions. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the trees of the garden, but God said we shall not eat of the fruit of that is in the midst of the garden. Neither shall we touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. The first big lie. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and that it was delight to her eyes, and that the tree was desired and made one wise. She took it of the fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. He knew better, he didn't. The outcome of disobeying God, and therefore the beginning of suffering. So in reality, suffering is the result of sin. We fell, Adam and Eve put us into the yoke of sin. We then became slaves to sin. That sin developed and we get suffering from it, because from that we get all the fact that man has to work with his brow, the land, till the land, the thorns and thistles come out of the ground. Everything starts to decay. And from that, we get the seed, so to speak, of suffering growing and getting bigger and bigger and more and more. So that's what I feel that I know I started with Job, but we had to also go back to what is suffering, because Job's going to be, there's a lot of things in Job that actually can happen to us and may well have happened. So the book of Job, it opens with the life of Job, and it's basically describing how he was living a life of righteousness before God, and he was prosperous. I'll just read it. It says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. So he was very wealthy. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house each day, with each one on his day, and they would send and invite their sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did this continually. So he petitioned on behalf of his children. Now, I know it sounds a bit, it's right back. Job, if we look at the names of places, is a good estimate to say that Job lived at roughly the same time as Abraham, because the same places are mentioned. There's Ur and there's Uz, and these are the places around the Middle East, and they were before it was actually got populated. Well, what we find is that if we are to apply that to ourselves, just because there are some cases that you would, when in those days it would be deemed to be that if you have if you're prosperous and you have lots of wealth, material wealth, then you're prosperous and you're spiritually righteous. Now, in this case, Job was upright and he was a righteous man and he walked with God and he knew God. But it was actually seen by others, the worldview. This could also be seen as a modern view as well, because people see wealth as a means of being, if you're wealthy, you're righteous, especially if you give to the poor and you are actually given and everything else. But that's maybe all you do. You don't do anything, that you don't listen to God. You may not be walking with him, but the world sees, the worldview is about it's good to give. And it is good to give. But it isn't just about that. That makes you righteous. And although I hasten to say that the worldview is prosperous, people may well be good and righteous, and that's in the eyes of the world. But they may not be righteous, have the righteousness of Christ on them to cover them. Because our righteousness, no matter how good we are, no matter how well-meaning we are, our righteousness is as filthy rags before the Lord. And we have to have the righteousness of Christ. So it is a good, yes. We see that in verses 6 to 12 is when the setting is having a dialogue. Sorry, I was dictating this and it's dictated Satan as setting. Satan is having a dialogue with God in the courts of heaven. Okay, Satan's got in. He's wanting to have a dialogue. He's wanting to go in and he's putting his petition out in front of the Lord. And he's saying about that, Job wouldn't be as so righteous if he didn't have the protection of God behind him. And that's what he does. That's what the devil does it for us. He goes and stands and he makes comment and he says, well, what if? And he will stand and he will put out lies and he will be saying that we will crumble. And God knows our heart, as he knew Job's heart. Because there was in the day when the sons of God came, that is whenever Satan came up and he went before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? And Satan said, does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him at his house, that all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. And that's when Satan went off and left the presence of the Lord. So we find that he went down, and the story goes that basically calamities hit all in one day. All on one day. There was actually, it comes that his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger who said the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and they were carried away. Some people had come in, raiders had come in and took on all the oxen away and the donkeys. And all the servants were killed except him. And then another messenger comes and says, the fire of God fell from heaven. A mighty storm had blown up, and a lightning storm, and basically had burned all the sheep and the shepherds, the servants who were being shepherding the sheep. Now, that's a lot of sheep that got killed. I think it was 7,000. Then you've got another group. He said His camels, well, at least he's got his camels, because they're like trucks. If we're thinking of a modern era, we're thinking of the bit of having a trucking company where you can actually take it and go and get the spices and bring them back. And that's what he had, his camels, and he had the manpower for them, but they got taken. Raiders came in again and they took them. So he was left with nothing. And he was thinking, well, bad day, can't get any worse, really. And then a servant came in and said there was a massive tornado storm, probably a massive wind came out of the desert and surrounded the house, and of the four corners of the house that all his children were in, and ripped it and killed everybody there. So that means, and they were all dead. So he lost all his possessions and his 7 children, all in one day. He went from being the richest to the poorest in a matter of a day. How would we react? Would we be asking, why me, Lord? Why is this happening? Why am I out on, what is going on? What have I done to deserve this? This type of suffering is not unheard of today. We just have to look around and see people who are in pain. We just have to see the people who have lost their homes because of COVID, because of not being able to pay the mortgage. It happens. People are out on the street. They've lost everything. They've got bereavement. They've lost loved ones. They've lost their jobs, lost their homes. So it's completely and utterly devastated, just the way Job was. There's people now that happens to. We look at the Ukraine, and so many people have become refugees. And they're having to leave the country and leave their homes, leave everything behind. And some don't even get out because of the harm that's been caused to they've been slaughtered. That is because the suffering is because of sin. Right back to the sin that we done. It really man's atrocity. So we can't blame God for this. We look at the Ukraine, we have done that. So we can say that because of original sin, it brought death into the world. And because of this, there is suffering. Now, suffering is not just limited to major catastrophes. It's something that everyone at some point will face in their lives. Even we who go to church and call ourselves Christians. There is a degree, sometimes a major degree of suffering that we have to go through. And it's how we respond to it that's important. It'll either make us a light in the darkness, or we will be swallowed up by the darkness. So we either become a light and do what, as we'll see, what Job did, and that is worship God, even in the midst of the atrocity or whatever's going on. It's not God's fault. It's not to blame on him. It is not even to ask him why. We can ask. We can do all we as long as we aren't blaming him. We're going to verbalize what our hearts are asking because of the pain. He understands that. But it's about having our right response to it and understanding what the suffering is. Let's consider a modern concept of this, and we have ever faced situations, especially going through over the last 2 years, 3 years, right? COVID's taken a big hit on the world stage, not just on separate, on individual countries, but it has taken out a lot of people. And at the height of it, we weren't able to actually be in contact with people. There were people who had who were suffering because their loved one dies and they couldn't even be at the funeral. So there's all this suffering that's going on. And it's how we actually deal with it. How do we respond? Job arose and he tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. That's how he responded to having everything taken away. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongness or unfaithfulness. So he never blamed God. We have to do the same. Things will happen, and we have to ask God to be a refuge, not to blame him, but to ask for his help and to get comfort from him, which he will give, and to also his protection and his comfort that he'll give. But we have to ask. So we can ask God, think certain things are going on, but we are not to place blame on him. Even if we don't understand the situation and we can't make any sense of it, it doesn't matter. God knows what it is. We might not be understanding it at that point, but he knows. So no matter what befalls us, like Job, everything being taken away. But the one thing he had was his wife, or you might have someone close to you that will stand with you. For him, it was his wife. And in the midst, and would actually stand with him in the midst of the storm that was going on. So it's having someone who is going to be with you. And if you don't, then you'd ask Jesus to come and stand, and he will stand beside you. So you don't have to have someone physical, as in the day of Job, but it would, if you do, then that's the role of either the husband or the wife, or a good friend, or whatever, brother or sister. And then we find, after all this, it's only in the first chapter of Job. In the second chapter, he gets hit by yet more, because the Satan goes, he hasn't got his response, so he goes and says, Lord, what I want to do is he'll curse you to your face if you let me hurt him a little bit. And have you considered, and God said he still holds his integrity, and he's still together, and Satan saying skin for skin. So he's asking to actually attack the skin, and that's what he does. He affects Job with, and we have to put this into perspective, and I don't want to be I'm not going to be too graphic about it, but it's absolutely, he's covered in sores, large boils from head to toe. And so he can't, unlike what we have nice soft beds. We've got therapeutic beds and everything else that might actually aid in the comfort. He had none of that. It would just be rugs on top of it. It would be a very hard bed. But the thing is, that's all he couldn't even lie on his back, because he was covered in these, and he was in absolute agony. And yet, he still did not curse God. He didn't put the blame on him. It wasn't God's fault. And then we find, unfortunately, because of everything happening, and this is what we'll find, it might be that it's the person closest to you, or a good friend, or whoever. But in Job's, it was his wife who had had enough, and the pressure was so much. And don't blame her, because she had lost all her children. She had lost everything. She then seen her husband be afflicted with these boils, and she was basically at her wit's end. So she says, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God now and die. Get this over with. Get rid of the pain. You're in absolute agony. Job said something really lovely, really. He told her off, but in a very gentle way. He said, you speak as one of the foolish women. He didn't say that she was foolish. He said that she spoke as one of those foolish women who would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? It's whatever comes. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So he didn't curse God. He didn't put the blame on him. He accepted what he had, his lot. And he just trusted that God would come through somehow. Unbeknown to him, Job didn't know about this. There was a cosmic battle going on. And this battle was, Satan was trying his best to win. And he was losing big time. Because after this, we hear, well, I'll say, similar battle. So we could be actually having a similar battle, okay? But what Satan wants nothing more than to bring us down and for us to curse God and blame him for our troubles, for why things happen in this world. But we see in Job that even though Job had lost everything, he still worshipped in the midst of his suffering. That's what we need to do. When we're at our lowest, when we've got the world crashing down around us, we just go and we worship God. We worship Yahweh. And that's why earlier on I was playing the Yahweh song of just all the different ways we can worship, and we can give praise and worship to him in all his different names, and the fact that he's Elohim Adonai, everything. He is Lord of Lords. He is sovereign. Now, from this point on, we don't hear Satan talk in the Old Testament. There's no more reference to him speaking until he pops up in the wilderness and starts to have a dialogue with Jesus to tempt him. So he had basically, Job, not through any, he wasn't any intent on his part, except for the fact that he was actually didn't curse God, because that's what Satan was wanting to do, and he didn't do it, so he lost. So through the very fact that Job didn't do that, he beat Satan at his own game. And that's what we have got to do. We have got to actually, when we think about things, about these situations, we have got to actually keep our hearts pure in the sense of when we are actually dealing with the likes of the suffering, like the it's a basic, oh goodness me. When we become Christians, one of the things is that we become followers of Christ. We're not taking on a surname. We're not taking on, oh, I'm Jimmy, I'm Christian, and that's my surname. No. I'm taking on a Christian is basically a follower of the Messiah. I am to follow him. So if we are not just a believer, Satan believes in Jesus. Anyone can believe in him, but not everyone will follow him. And that's the difference. To follow means to be in his footsteps. It also means that we will be hated by the world. The world did not like Jesus. That's why they put him on a cross. They couldn't take his message because it made them, the message of the cross is so devastating for man's heart that he has to then give up what he is and acknowledge what he is. And when people don't want to acknowledge who they are and the evil in their heart and accept a gift, then they just don't want that light shining on them. And that's what Jesus did. And that's what he does. If we are to follow him, then we are to remember that we are going to be hated. The world will hate us just as they hated him. And it means that we will be going through suffering. That is one thing that we have to say that we will get. We will have suffering. It's called tribulation. And when John and Peter in the back end of John's gospel were talking in front of Jesus, and he said about something about dying and about living. They were having a conversation, and Jesus came in and he said, "Who's it to you? But I'll tell you, Peter, how you are going to die." And he explained to him that he will live a long life. He will not be able to tie his own garment, for someone else will do it for him. And basically he was describing that the fact that he was going to be shackled and he was going to be led away and he would be martyred for him. That would be his death. In the New Testament era, at the time of Jesus and afterwards, it was pretty common in the first 3 centuries or so that if you were a Christian, you had no rights. You were going to be, at some point, you were risking life. Your very life was at risk if you ever stated that you were a Christian. Not so much now. We don't have to, we aren't facing that. We're facing people denying us and stopping us from worshiping, or stopping us from meeting, or stopping us from doing certain things. It's slightly different. We aren't having to face in the UK or maybe in the US. We're not having to face death, ultimate death, just because we state that we are a Christian. But we do face a barrage of criticism. We face barrages of people trying to put us down and make little and belittle us. And that's another way of dealing it, but we're not actually facing the same things that they faced in the early church. So we have to understand that the path that Christ is calling us as a Christian is a narrow one, and it's hard going. but he's there with us, but it's hard going. So it's not an easy path. And we have to remember that there is going to be suffering that comes along with that. But he will be there with us to aid us in that suffering. And the Holy Spirit is there to anoint us with oil, and in a sense of the spiritual sense, which will actually help cleanse us and heal the wounds. It's a little bit like I got 2 ton logs, 2 tons of logs delivered yesterday. And the guy dumped them all out outside on the street beside my house. And he was supposed to come at 4 o'clock. He came at 6:30. I had this big pile of 2 tons of logs sitting there in the middle of the road, or side of the road, and I had to get them stored. And I had a limited time to do it. But there was no help. Nobody came over to help and say, oh, I'll help you with that. Nope, there was no help. I just got down and did it. Now, the point is, whenever I first started to do it, I got twinges in my back. I thought, oh no, I'm going to have a sore back tomorrow. I got twinges in my arms because I was lifting logs. And then basically I ended up, after it took me 2.5 hours to move these. I think I've shown a few of you the actual the logs. What they was I had to stack them, and basically there you go. That's the height. That's the height of it. The height is my height, and it's 2 logs deep. So I had to move all of them into there. And by the end of it, I had felt that I had done a 2.5 hour workout on the weight on the gym. Now that's muscle, that's building that. I've gotten my muscles were worked. They were tired, but they were worked. They had worked. I'd worked them properly, so I didn't just bend over. I went down and picked up using my legs. So I did everything correctly. Today I'm fine. In the same way, when we do spiritual, when we have to face the suffering and we go through spiritual attacks, we have to build up our spiritual muscles. I suffered by doing the logs, picking all those logs up. It was painful. 2.5 hours carrying logs in and out, in and out. It was painful. But in the same way, our spiritual muscles have to be built up in the same way. We have to go through the pain to achieve spiritual muscular growth. Okay, so it's about seeing the opportunity as an opportunity and giving thanks to God for it. We don't always expect to give thanks in the middle of turmoil and everything else. But for me, I've been in a storm for the last 3 years. If I wasn't giving thanks to God, I wouldn't be here now, doing what I'm doing. In the middle of this storm, I have been given a calling to come and talk about Jesus to people, using this medium and become a pastor, and to actually basically share what God means to me and what he can do for you. Now, I can't go into much the real details, but the storm was pretty bad and it's still going. It's still blowing. But storms are actually useful, because I think I was saying this to Pastor Demont, is that if you take it as a sailing analogy, when we're sailing, in a boat, if there's no wind, if there's no storm, then basically you're becalmed and you ain't going anywhere unless you take the oars out and you start rowing. You need wind, so you need a storm. If the storm is too big, then you actually seek out a safe harbor. And that is where the Lord comes in. Because then you seek him out if it's too big. If it's too big a storm, you go to him and he is our harbor. He is our safe harbor. And we will be protected from that stuff, from the rages and ravages of that storm. But if the storm is mild and you could be out in it, the Holy Spirit will guide you in it, because you then move, and it makes you move, because that is, you need that wind, you need that choppiness, you need all that elements going on to make the boat move. And in so doing, there's the crew that moves. I see it as the way the church is. We can be one big boat. And what we need is we change the captain who's on the rudder every so often. And we have the crew members pulling on the sheets and making sure that we stay tight and into the wind, or at the side of the wind. And basically we go to where we're supposed to go. Now, in all that, we may be doing that, and some of that storm may be suffering, maybe parts of the suffering that we're going through. People have actually, there's in I think 1991, there's this thing about the worldview of saying it's an act of God. When the tsunami hit, or a storm, actually it was a cyclone or anticyclone that hit Bangladesh, and about 250,000 or 500,000 people were just wiped off. There was the Twin Towers. Not just the people in the towers, but all the people around that were, whenever they came down. There's been lots of, there's basically in other places in Iraq before it was actually, there was actually a lot of violence, a lot of people being taken out. In Africa, there was Idi Amin, the different regimes of different, basically people who had put themselves in power, who were devastated and put suffering, making the people suffer. All these atrocities and tsunami going into Japan, you know, they blame, a lot of people blame God and put that on God's shoulders. But the world and the universe has been affected by us. It's because it goes right back again to Genesis. And that's where I'm going to wind it up. Basically, we have to remember that all the suffering, all the decay, everything that's causing all this happening, and the different sufferings that we have to face, is made by us. And we are the culprits. We are the ones, if there's any blame to be put on, we are the ones who should be taking it and owning it. What God has done in the form of handing Jesus, and Jesus coming down, he's taken all that devastation, all that suffering that we created, he took it on. So that way we can actually go, not in our righteousness before God, but be in his righteousness. Because we follow him, we take what comes at us, we keep worshiping, and eventually we will get to wear the righteousness of Christ.